Bro, listen up, because what is going on right now with the Washington Commanders is exactly the kind of organized chaos that has everybody glued to screens, refreshing Twitter every 5 minutes like life depends on it. Free agency kicks off on Monday. The Commanders have almost $90 million in cap space, $90 million, and the whole world is looking at Washington, D.C., wondering what Adam Peters is going to do with all that ammo. And look, y'all do not understand the spot this squad is in right now after a 2025 season that felt like a bucket of cold water, with Jaden Daniels missing 10 games because of injuries, with an offense that never really found a full rhythm, with an offensive line that took more of a beating than it should have. The Commanders have a real shot to overhaul this roster in a massive way before the 2026 season even kicks off. This is not about small tweaks, bro. This is about a full-on reset at key positions. Tonight, we're talking about 3 things that have the fan base completely wired. First, the big names insiders are predicting will land in Washington, including a former Super Bowl MVP and a receiver who flew under the radar all postseason. Second, there is a wide receiver with a $120 million contract that basically nobody is talking about right now, and the Commanders are being mentioned as favorites to sign that player. And third, there is a kid from Maryland fans have dreamed about bringing home for years. And tonight, we're going to talk about why that probably is never going to happen and why that is actually okay. Let's get into it. News 1. Kenneth Walker III and Rashid Shaheed. The Commanders steal the Seahawks playbook. Okay, fam, let's start with what matters most here. And if you are a Commanders fan and you have not seen this yet, sit down because this is real. Dan Graziano from ESPN dropped free agency predictions and has the Washington Commanders signing not 1, but 2 players who were key pieces in the Seahawks Super Bowl run. We are talking about Kenneth Walker III and Rashid Shaheed. 2 contracts, roughly $84 million combined. And bro, if this actually happens, Washington's offseason is going to be remembered as one of the best moves of the Adam Peters era. Let's start with Kenneth Walker III because that is the main storyline. Super Bowl MVP, that is not a title they just hand out to anybody. Walker III put up 1,027 rushing yards in the regular season with 5 touchdowns, and then in the playoffs, 313 rushing yards with 4 touchdowns. 4 in the playoffs. And on top of that, 9 catches for 104 receiving yards. This player can run between the tackles, can bounce it outside, can catch in space, and has the kind of burst that makes it look like this player should be running at the NFL Combine right now instead of already being an established pro. That is exactly the running back profile Jaden Daniels needs next to that arm. Graziano is projecting a 3-year, $44 million deal with $22 million guaranteed. Put that in perspective, Breece Hall just got the franchise tag from the Jets at $14.3 million per year. Walker probably comes in just above that in average annual value. That number makes sense for the position in this market, and the Commanders have the cap space to handle it without compromising other needs. Bro, $90 million in cap space is a blessing in disguise after the season this team just went through. Listen, one of the biggest problems with the Commanders' offense in 2025 was the absence of a true number 1 running back who could legitimately open up the ground game. Jackery Krosky-Merritt was legitimately solid for a rookie. 805 yards and 8 touchdowns is no joke. Chris Rodriguez Jr. chipped in around 500 yards and 6 scores, but neither of those 2 has the caliber or the explosiveness that forces defenses to respect the run game in a different way. Walker III would completely flip that equation. That presence forces defensive coordinators to drop 8 in the box, and when you put 8 in the box against Jaden Daniels is going to cook you over the top with vertical shots. That dynamic is what makes real offenses terrifying. And here's something people are not breaking down enough. Jaden Daniels is also a legit running threat. As a rookie, Daniels was one of the most dangerous rushing quarterbacks in the league. Even though 2025 got cut short by injuries, that part of the game does not just disappear when you have Daniels threatening to break the pocket and take off, plus Walker III threatening to hit the edge for a home run. Defensive coordinators have no idea which one to respect more. That creates pre-snap confusion that is pure gold for an offense. Gap integrity turns into a nightmare when a defender has no clue whether to trigger on the quarterback or the running back. That is elite football, bro. Now let's move over to Rashid Shaheed. And listen, this kid might be the most underrated signing of the entire offseason. If Washington pulls it off, Shaheed landed with the Seahawks mid-season. And what this player did in the playoffs was quietly nasty. 687 receiving yards between the Saints and Seahawks. And in the postseason, added 3 return touchdowns, 2 on kickoffs, and 1 on a punt. Bro, 3 return touchdowns, that is momentum in its purest form. That flips games, that injects life into a stadium that has been desperate for a spark. Graziano is projecting a 3-year, $40 million deal with $20 million guaranteed for Shaheed. That is reasonable for a receiver with that kind of speed and versatility. And check this, the teams that swing and miss on Alec Pierce are probably going to pivot right towards Shaheed, who is a different type of receiver, but just as valuable if used properly. As a return specialist alone, Shaheed already justifies a big chunk of that contract, but as a slot receiver or in spread looks, that horizontal speed adds a layer to the offense that can shred mismatches in coverage. And in Washington, the value there is huge. When you have Terry McLaurin as the number 1 soaking up attention from elite corners, and you add Shaheed as a burner in that second receiver spot, suddenly the safeties have a decision to make. Do we stay deep on McLaurin or slide down into the slot to help on Shaheed? That pre-snap choice is exactly the kind of read Jaden Daniels eats alive. That football IQ to process defenses is near the top of that draft class, and when you give that mind the right weapons, that IQ turns into points. And this is where I really start to get hyped, bro. Because imagine that entire offense humming in 2026 with a healthy Daniels for 16 games. Just picture it. The Commanders could pull off both of these signings without wrecking their cap situation. With roughly $87 million available, locking in around $28 million in average annual value between Walker and Shaheed still leaves more than enough room to address the offensive line, safety, and other holes. The math works, the fit works, and the hype is completely justified. If Adam Peters pulls off that double move, bro, Washington's 2026 free agency is going in the history books. Okay, look, take a breath for a second because what comes next is just as crazy. There is a receiver nobody is talking about sitting on a $120 million deal who could end up rocking burgundy and gold. And the reason it might happen has everything to do with Jaden Daniels, everything. News 2, Brandon Aiyuk, the forgotten $120 million receiver, Commanders' favorites. Fam, this is the most intriguing storyline of the offseason that basically nobody is saying out loud. Brandon Aiyuk, yeah, that Brandon Aiyuk, the one who fought with the Niners for months to lock in that $120 million contract, the one who was all-pro in 2023, the one who then blew out both the ACL and MCL in Week 7 of 2024 against the Kansas City Chiefs, the one who then went radio silent with San Francisco in 2025 with no real explanation. That Aiyuk and the Commanders are now listed as favorites by Dan Graziano at ESPN to reunite that player with best friend and former college teammate Jaden Daniels. Keep it a buck, this is wild. First, let me lay out the whole context because this story has more layers than an onion, bro. Brandon Aiyuk and Jaden Daniels played together at Sacramento State. College connection, personal connection. Jaden Daniels has talked publicly about the relationship with Aiyuk and the natural chemistry between the two. And now add this, Adam Peters, the Commanders' general manager, has familiarity with Aiyuk from the San Francisco days when Peters was in that Niners front office. So the connection is not just emotional, it is organizational. Peters knows Aiyuk, knows the game, knows the strengths. The contract situation here is fascinating. In August of 2024, Aiyuk signed a 4-year, $120 million extension with the Niners after months of drama. Holdout threats, trade rumors. At that moment, it looked like a happy ending for everybody. And in those first 7 games of 2024, Aiyuk put up 25 catches for 374 yards before wrecking that knee against the Chiefs. Then the player basically vanished from the map, cut off communication with San Francisco. The Niners voided all the guaranteed money in the deal, and now it is basically a lock that this contract gets terminated when the league year opens on March 11th. Free, on the market. And listen, the big question nobody can fully answer right now is this. How good is Brandon Aiyuk physically at this point? Adam Schefter said it straight on the Pardon My Take podcast. That knee was literally destroyed. An ACL and MCL tear at the same time is one of the nastiest injuries a receiver can suffer because both ligaments are critical for lateral stability, for explosive cuts, for separation in route running. A year and a half after that injury, with almost no public info about the rehab because communication with the team was cut off, nobody genuinely knows what version of Aiyuk is going to show up at training camp. And that is the real risk, bro. Not the drama, not the history of friction with the Niners. The real risk is medical. If Aiyuk shows up to Washington's camp and that knee still is not at 100%, if that player has lost that first explosive step that made those routes so devastating, if the separation against NFL corners is not there like it was in 2023, then whatever contract gets signed becomes a problem on day one. And the Commanders have already lived something similar with Terry McLaurin. Let's talk McLaurin for a second because that context matters for this decision. In 2024, McLaurin dropped 13 receiving touchdowns, a franchise record, and the Commanders handed out a 3-year, $97 million extension. In 2025, McLaurin missed 7 games, the most of the career, and ended with barely 38 catches for 582 yards and 3 touchdowns. One of the worst seasons of that career. Washington paid for the 2024 version of McLaurin and got something completely different. Do they really want to run that risk back with Aiyuk? Because if Aiyuk is healthy, bro, if that knee is truly at 100%, if that explosive route running that made this player all-pro in 2023 is still there, then we are talking about a completely different tier of receiver. The ability to create separation in spacing schemes, to shred defenses on crossers and go routes, to rack up yards after the catch is legitimately elite when healthy. That profile next to Jaden Daniels, paired with timing and chemistry that dates back to college, is a combo defensive coordinators absolutely do not want to see. But there is a conversation Washington has to have with full honesty. At what price? How much guaranteed money? Because if Aiyuk lands a deal with serious guarantees and that knee does not hold up, Washington ends up stuck exactly the way San Francisco did. The difference is the Niners were able to void the guarantees because Aiyuk cut off communication. If that does not happen in Washington, the Commanders eat that cap hit in full. The interesting part is Graziano says basically nobody else in the league is showing real interest in Aiyuk right now. Schefter has thrown out the Steelers, the Patriots, and the Commanders as teams that would at least check in, but checking in is very different from putting real numbers on the table. If the Commanders are the only ones with serious interest, that means they can structure the deal in a way that protects the team with easy outs and minimal guarantees in the later years. That completely changes the risk profile. And if Jaden Daniels is pushing behind the scenes to bring that friend in, bro, Adam Peters is going to listen. Franchise quarterbacks have that kind of pull in free agency now. Ask Mahomes how many receivers have come to Kansas City because of that influence, or Lamar in Baltimore. Elite quarterbacks get what they push for, and if Daniels wants Aiyuk, that conversation is absolutely happening. Bottom line, and hear this clearly, Aiyuk is the highest risk, highest reward move on this entire market. If healthy, the Commanders might land the impact wide receiver they need to complement McLaurin and really turn this offense into a problem. If that knee does not respond, it turns into a huge headache. The key is how the contract is structured and how deep the medical due diligence goes before any commitment. And with Peter's background in San Francisco and that personal familiarity with Aiyuk, this front office probably has more info than the public ever will. That gives at least some confidence that if they pull the trigger, they know exactly what they are walking into. Okay, bro, now we shift to something completely different because this next story is all about nostalgia, fan dreams, and the brutal reality of why some dreams just have to die. This one is about a kid from Maryland who never wore burgundy and gold, and there is a good reason it should stay that way. News 3, Stefon Diggs and the dream that has to end. Yo, fam, I need you to hear this with an open heart and a clear head because what I am about to say is going to sting a little for some of you. Stefon Diggs just got cut by the New England Patriots. Free agent, grew up in Gaithersburg, Maryland, went to Our Lady of Good Counsel High School, played for the Maryland Terrapins, and for almost a decade, Washington Commanders fans have dreamed about bringing this player home. And y'all do not understand how much I get that dream emotionally. But today, putting emotion to the side, we're going to talk about why that dream needs to stay just that, a dream. First, the historical context. Because it is only fair to give the proper respect before closing that door. Stefon Diggs is a 4-time Pro Bowler, has gone over 1,000 receiving yards 7 times in a career. 7, that is legitimately Hall of Fame conversation territory when all is said and done. In the Vikings years, this player was one of the best receivers in the league. With the Bills, there were absolutely brilliant seasons. And this past year with the Patriots, already at 32 years old, the player crossed the 1,000-yard mark again. Respect, maximum respect. But bro, there are things the stat sheet does not tell you. And this is where we have to be honest as fans, because wanting Diggs in Washington for sentimental reasons is beautiful. But building a roster is a business, and in that business, Diggs in 2026 creates more problems than solutions. The first problem is the off-field baggage. Diggs is currently tied up in legal proceedings that are working through the courts. I am not going to speculate on details because it is an ongoing process, but what can absolutely be said is that NFL organizations dissect this kind of situation under a microscope before signing anybody. The drama in Buffalo, where things basically turned into a locker room problem before the Bills moved on, is not some random one-off. There is a pattern of behavior that franchises have to take very seriously. The second problem is age and role. At the peak, Diggs is a number 1 wide receiver who needs the ball to stay happy. That player is good when the stats are there. Things get loud when there's a feeling of being ignored. And in Washington, with Terry McLaurin already locked in as the established number 1 on a $97 million deal, Diggs would be walking in as the number 2. You really think Stefon Diggs is going to take that role quietly? You think on days when McLaurin gets 8 targets and Diggs only sees 3, the locker room is going to stay peaceful? Bro, that is a recipe for exactly the kind of drama this franchise does not need while trying to build a winning culture around Jaden Daniels. The third problem, and this is the biggest one from a pure football standpoint, is the physical decline. Listen, cracking 1,000 yards is still impressive, but the 1,000 yards Diggs put up in 2025 with the Patriots did not look anything like the 1,000 yards from the Vikings days in 2017 or the Bills in 2020. The version of Diggs you see today is a short and intermediate route receiver who leans on football IQ and leverage savvy to create separation, because that first step and that initial burst at the top of the route are not what they used to be. That is not a knock. That is how this player stays relevant. But that kind of older receiver on that kind of contract is not what Washington needs right now. The Commanders need youth, speed, and upside in that wide receiver room. The Hogs Haven piece nailed it. Wan'Dale Robinson, Rashid Shaheed, Romeo Doubs, Calvin Austin. Those are names in the 23 to 26 age range with real speed and with the potential to grow in a system over 3 or 4 years. That is how you invest in the future of an offense built around Daniels. Signing Diggs is paying for the past version of Diggs. And listen, there is something else that does not get said enough when this specific topic comes up, and that is timing. The moment to bring Stefon Diggs to Washington was 5 or 6 years ago, when that player wanted out of Minnesota, when the age was around 28 or 29, when the explosiveness at the breakpoint was still there, and Diggs could be the number 1 receiver fans dreamed about. Back then, that move would have made real sense. It would have been a legit impact swing, but that train left the station a long time ago, bro. The fact that Washington never pulled the trigger back then and now might kick the tires when Diggs is 32 with legal issues in the background should tell you everything you need to know. And here's something that honestly makes me feel a lot of tenderness for the fans that still hold on to this. The player suited up for the Maryland Terrapins, went to school in Gaithersburg from the D.C. area, bro. Emotionally, the pull makes 100% sense. If this was a movie, Stefon Diggs signs with Washington, gets one last epic season at home, and rides off into the sunset in D.C., surrounded by those roots. That is a beautiful storyline, but this is not a movie. This is the NFL, and in this league, romantic decisions can lock a franchise into contracts that derail entire seasons. Adam Peters needs to completely ignore this idea. There are better options on the board. There is cap space to go after players who bring real long-term value instead of a veteran who mainly brings short-term nostalgia. The fan base can dream about Diggs all day on Twitter, but in the Commanders' front office, that conversation should not last longer than 5 minutes. There's always a moment in free agency where each team has to choose between what it wants emotionally and what it needs strategically. The Commanders under Adam Peters have already shown they can make serious, well-structured front office decisions. This is another chance to prove exactly that. Stefon Diggs, even as a Maryland guy, even as a 4-time Pro Bowler, even as a feel-good story, is not the answer for Washington in 2026. And the sooner the fan base accepts that, the better positioned everyone will be to celebrate the real moves that actually move the needle. Bro, this episode was loaded with info, breakdowns, and honestly, that mix of pure emotion and cold-blooded strategy that defines just how complicated and insanely exciting this time of year is for any Washington Commanders fan. Kenneth Walker III as a Super Bowl MVP ready to touch down in D.C., Rashid Shaheed bringing the kind of juice and explosiveness in the return game this team has been missing for years, Brandon Aiyuk as the ultimate wild card, the highest risk, highest reward play on the market tied to Jaden Daniels through a real friendship that goes back to college, and Stefon Diggs as the final closing of a fan dream chapter that already had its time. Free agency kicks off Monday with the legal tampering window, and the Commanders have the resources, the vision, and if everything breaks right, the firepower to make 2026 the year this team gets back into real Super Bowl conversations. Jaden Daniels is 26 years old, Adam Peters is building something real, and we, the fan base, after decades of waiting for exactly this kind of moment, are right in the front row watching it happen in real time. That has no price, bro. That has no price. Do not forget to hit like if this breakdown really hit you, share it with that Commander's friend who is still yelling about bringing in Diggs because that person needs to hear the truth too. Subscribe if you have not already because the next few days are going to be an absolute roller coaster of news, and we are going to be here every time something big drops. Fam, the Commanders are building something special. Let's be present to witness it. Hail to the Washington Commanders always.